I think this might sound like a bit like a controversial topic to tackle about because of the very nature of this conflict. And, this is more of a loose thoughts kind of thing and a bit of a PSA on what to think on this sort of thing. And it's mainly because of my own personal opinion on this conflict in particular, which I don't really much think there's anybody else tackling the situation with the nuance or the sort of middle ground that it deserves to be treated with. So, okay, let me talk about the conflict between Israel and Palestine, which let me preface this by saying that yes, I support the Palestinian people as a part Jewish person. And while I recognize that Hamas is a really dreadful terrorist group, it's still undeniable that we must stop the genocide of Palestinian people by the hands of the Israeli government. Let me explain this, right? There's two major problems in this whole conflict. There's the Israeli Zionist government, which is a fascist government at most, and then there's Hamas, which obviously is the it's not really the sort of doesn't come out of nowhere. Basically, it's just basically a consequence of the Zionist government's kind of oppression and genocide of Palestinians in some way or another. Hamas wouldn't be what it is without the constant genocide of the Israeli government. That's the basic understanding what you should get out of this. It's not, I mean, you should get the middle ground of this term, but even then, you think I think it should probably think that a lot of these genocide tends to be paid off with the blood of many of the civilians on both sides, on Israel and Palestine. More on Palestine, that is, but especially more on Palestine, because quite frankly, Hamas is only an excuse for the Israeli government to actually push further the genocide of Palestinians. And it has been going on for really incredibly long. I thought at first that this subject was too complicated to be able to do something about on my own, at least, because I had such little power against this sort of things. But I recognize now that at least educating people on this subject with a bit of nuance and middle ground on the situation without going overboard and rich baiting or whatever is might be appropriate to put like my grain of sand on the situation and my contribution to this whole situation so we can hopefully have the possibility of having a ceasefire in the conflict, because that's what matters. We need a ceasefire on this sort of conflict, and we need it right now before things get escalated and or it's already too late. But basic gist of it, right? I don't really see much. The thing that mostly infuriates me about this thing is people use this as a trend or as some sort of excuse to throw off propaganda at your face. I mean, don't get me wrong, no one is immune to propaganda at this point, but there's too many opportunists. I don't think I'm gonna name names except for I don't know people like Hassan Piker or Sam Hyde or something like that, where they tend to use the subject matter as for profit or for easy views or controversy views, which is pretty dire. I'll say the least, because quite frankly, it's pretty ugly doing it that way. And normally these people don't treat a situation with such nuance that they have to be completely one-sided, right? This is not the way to be. Like, I recognize the Israeli government, the Zionist Israeli government, is horrible, and the Hamas is also pretty horrible, even though it's a direct consequences of Israeli government's genocide against Palestinian people. You can understand that the result Hamas is a result of the constant self-defense of Palestinian people in some way, even though they do it in really horrible ways, equally horrifying ways than the Israeli government. But seeing people take basically one side or of this whole conflict just because I don't know, because they have a certain spite on either Jewish people or either terrorism as a whole is naive. It's pretty ignorant. It's ugly at most. And I think this should be tackled with basically the nuance that I could possibly give. You should understand also that, there's no way to easily sort of unravel this thing unless politicians are involved, but still we can make an impact with this. And I see too many people being silent on the topic because, like I did previously, they thought the subject was too complicated to be sorted on its own. Like with the very little contributions of each individual, it's impossible to solve this conflict. It isn't. It isn't that complicated, and it needs to be spoken out just in case. Because quite frankly, with the united contributions of every single bit of grain of sand in this subject matter, it equally helps. Like the pressure, it builds pressure on the sort of powers that be, on the world powers that rule this whole Western world, and even other governments as well. That at some point it kind of helps. So like I run a game developer, a website, a content creation platform, whatever you want to call it, right? And I don't think that as a representative of such organization, I should be silent on this thing. And I see too many to like there's a lot of corporations who equally stood for Ukraine when it was invaded by Russia, right? But they went silent on the whole Palestine situation, which is, I mean, kind of ironic and pretty depressing at some point, because you know who's really in power. The West is mostly like a white supremacist system. And when they see someone who is being oppressed, like Palestinians, who are people of color by basis, they have no power. They basically have no support from the international community, which, let me remind you that the international community is mostly composed of not just by countries like Israel or the US, but also other Western countries, which are mostly composed of white population. This is the whole nitty gritty of the situation, and it's ugly already. So basically, Palestine, unlike Ukraine at this point, because Ukraine is basically white at some point, Palestine doesn't have support from the international community. And, at least what we can expect from here is to keep pressuring the so called international community in some way. So with these little bits of grains of sand and each and every time from the more people possible. So it obviously starts with educating people about the whole situation in Palestine. I obviously probably recommend you looking for better videos on this subject that are not obviously rich propaganda stuff or rich baiting, clickbait at this point. I know there's on YouTube a lot of videos explaining the whole Israel Palestine situation, and that is a whole situation that has been going on for really long. I already explained in our video debunking the most common anti Semitic tropes and things, that Israel kind of deserves a land of its own. But I mean, Jews deserve a land of their own, but we're gonna be honest. It's not. It should not be this way by genociding the whole entire people. And I gotta be honest. I'd rather have Jewish people live all across the globe in multiple regions of the world, scattered around in perfect harmony with everybody else without the threat of white supremacy or anything, than have them genocide under a Zionist fascist government the other sorts of people, like the Palestinian people. So they have like a forced land of their own thanks to the British colonialism thing. And it's not really the way things should work. At least I will understand if they have Israel sort of, you know, coexisting with Palestinians in the same way, just so the Israel is both a land for Jewish people and Palestinians in some way. That's like an ideal world, but this is not really an ideal world. This world kind of works on the ideas of imperialism, of colonialism, and oppression that so much that is pretty much unavoidable at this point. But these problems could have been avoided, And I think yet, if the conflict hasn't escalated too much already, it's not too late to sort this out and ask for a ceasefire. I think a ceasefire is the best option here, so we can eventually lead to a situation where Jewish and Palestinian people can coexist with each other in peaceful harmony, and just rid of the Zionist fascist leaders who are responsible for this genocide. They have no room the same way that Nazis don't have no room on this planet anymore. And it doesn't make sense the same way to have Nazis than to have Zionist fascists. And that's what I can probably say about this, honestly. It's an ugly conflict, but it could have been easily prevented. But now all we got to do is sort of educate ourselves and just try to contribute each other to the whole grain of sand to the situation, and together we can sort of pressure these sorts of systems to force so-called force ceasefire on this conflict. That's probably the ideal solution, but God knows what's going to happen. I know it sounds like a bummer to end a video about asking for a ceasefire with the words, well, nothing's going to happen at all. But I mean, even though we're being realistic, we should still pressure these governments and the sort to actually do their thing in favor of a ceasefire. Because I mean, this should end. This genocide has no place on this planet. And in all honesty, I think you should support more the Palestinian people more than the Zionist government of Israel, because the Zionist government of Israel is just full of shit. And I know it. Because even as a part Jewish person like myself who's got two Sephardic second names, I don't think I can support this genocide no more. I think I had enough of this shit.